Just once? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I call the meeting to order and appreciate everyone coming today. So we are here in the Standing Committee for Sports Concussion meeting, and I appreciate everyone coming. So pursuant to motion adopted by the Standing Committee on Health on Thursday, October 4th, 2018, the subcommittee is resuming its study of sports-related concussions in Canada. We have two panel witnesses with us tonight. First, we'd like to welcome Sandhya Mailabathula and Swampa Mailabathula. Thank you very much for being here. Both of them are PhD candidates at the University of Toronto. Both seem to know this place as they were active parts of Bill C-566, which was tabled in the 41st legislature. They have a PowerPoint presentation, and I will give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for having us here today. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs, et merci beaucoup pour votre...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here with us tonight.
To speak with you and to share our perspectives. My name is Sandhya.
And my name is Swapna. Do I have my mic on? I don't know, but my name is Swapna, and don't worry, you're not seeing double. It's not an April Fool's joke. We are twins. We'll begin with a brief introduction of ourselves just for some context. And as was mentioned, we are a PhD candidate and an MD PhD candidate at the University of Toronto, and we've been involved in the field of concussions for just under a decade now. We have an interdisciplinary background in concussions. We are currently conducting our doctoral research, but we started out by working on proposed legislation at the federal level starting in 2010, and we've also consulted on Ontario policies, including PPM Policy Program Memorandum 158, which is currently being implemented in schools across Ontario. We're also longtime advocates for concussion issues stemming from our passion for hockey, and we are also very involved in science communication and education outreach on the topic for all ages.
Yeah, So what is a concussion? We know you've already heard of this, of course, many times, so we're just going to do a brief recap. So this is an injury that involves a temporary functional disturbance of the brain that's caused by a traumatic force and that can lead to a pathophysiological process that can in turn manifest in debilitating physiological and psychological symptoms and also have social consequences as well. So these symptoms, as well as the injury experience, can vary from person to person. And we also know that the effects of a concussion are not always observable to an onlooker, so it's very much of an invisible injury too. So we know that our brains are quite fragile, and here we have a 3D printed model of a brain, just to kind of show that. And we know that the consistency of the brain, even more so than in this model, is actually quite like that of Jell-O, so that just emphasizes the need to protect it. So here we have an example of the mechanism of injury, if I can get this to, yep. So here you're seeing a direct blow to the head. Another way to get a concussion is a blow to the body, which then results in a whiplash effect to the brain and the head.
So concussions are a growing problem in Canada, and this image from the Canadian Institute for Health Information shows that it's been reported to have been grown perhaps most in children and youth in recent years, and this is representing a lot of sport concussions. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, though, and it truly is a public health problem. It's important to note, however, that while many concussions happen in sport, and we are in the subcommittee for sport concussion, concussions do occur in other contexts, like in transportation, in the workplace, and in the home, and other recreational activities, and so on, as well as in all ages and populations.
So our recommendations cover 5 key areas where our government can play an important and crucial role. So these are listed on the slide here. So these recommendations are based on current research, including some of our own, as well as feedback from and discussions with a wide variety of stakeholders from across the country and beyond, and also some of our own policy work, as mentioned, with Bill C-566 that was introduced in the 41st legislature. So the first area that we're going to talk about with you today is prevention, and prevention is key in reducing things such as the financial burden that you would see with an injury such as this, as well as the adverse effects on quality of life. So our first recommendation here is to ask the government to encourage policy that's going to ensure that sport organizations as well as schools are actually contributing to a culture shift towards reducing the risk of concussion.
The second recommendation on concussion prevention for you to consider is supporting concussion prevention strategies and the development and implementation of those, including things like rule changes like body checking policies, as well as changes to our built environment and promoting awareness. Our last prevention-related recommendation is about supporting and promoting research on concussion strategies for prevention. So we have 6 recommendations for concussion management for you to consider. The first of which is the promotion of psychological screening post-concussion to help identify potential mental health concerns that may occur after.
Sorry, this is brilliant. Can we have this? Like, do we have we been given this?
We don't have it now, right?
Like, this is.
For the conversation with them.
We have the PDF.
Yeah,
No,
we
that's
have a
fine.
PDF.
If we can get it
Okay.
even after the meeting,
I'll find
because I don't want to
It's good.
interrupt this, but this is really important that we should have this.
So we would ask
Sorry,
that if you wouldn't mind, if you could share this with us after the fact with your
Sure.
slides? Oh,
We
we do,
have
oh,
a
we do
copy
have
on
it?
us
So,
today,
okay, we
too.
do have it? Okay, great, thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
Don't worry about it.
Right?
We will send one to each of you individually. No, we appreciate that this will be useful to you. The second point here, second recommendation, is to really promote educational initiatives that explicitly include mental health. And the third is to ensure concussion care for all Canadians who need it.
So next, we're recommending that the government encourage sport organizations to mandate that all athletes, as well as coaches, referees, and other team staff, actually complete concussion management education. We also believe that it's imperative to have support for concussion management research, as knowledge in this area can help us better understand how to improve outcomes, how to reduce the recovery times, as well as improving the injury experience itself. Finally, for management, we're recommending that the government encourage the establishment as well as the enforcement of mandatory concussion recognition and management training, particularly for professional accreditation programs.
So the next part is there are a lot of emerging themes actually in the field of concussion in recent years, and we have 4 recommendations based on those emerging themes for you to consider. The first of which is to support prospective and well-designed research studies on concussion and gender and sex considerations, as women and girls are often an overlooked population in research. The second is to support and promote research on the most appropriate strategies for improving reporting intention, as well as programs that help support that behavior change.
So we also ask the government to mandate sex and gender research training for all government-funded researchers in order to facilitate this type of research, and also to support areas of research in these emerging topics. So for example, subconcussive impacts, multiple impacts to the head, because knowledge in these areas can help us to better understand how these factors might influence management needs, what role they may play in long-term effects, and how these can affect Canadians. So the next area we're going to discuss with you is policy research. And our first recommendation, of course, is to ask the government to encourage and to fund and support research on concussion policies themselves. But it's also important to disseminate very consistent messaging through policies themselves, and also to facilitate these conversations at and between the federal, provincial, and territorial and municipal levels of government. Furthermore, we'd like to have the government support policy at the provincial and territorial levels that are going to be at the elementary, secondary, and post-secondary education institutions that will help to provide strategies for return to play, return to activity, and return to learn, particularly including academic accommodations.
Our next recommendation about policy research is to address any regional inequities that may exist between rural, suburban, and urban areas in terms of access to resources in order to be able to even implement concussion policy. The next recommendation is to ensure regular evaluation of concussion policy wherever it may exist. And our final policy-related recommendation is to promote and develop and implement a national surveillance system for tracking concussions across the country to help with evaluation, but also to help perhaps identify any subset of the population that might need extra help.
So the final area of recommendations that we're going to discuss with you today is education. And first, we recommend that our government support national education efforts, as well as the harmonization of information between school and non-school sport activities, with a particular focus on developing and promoting a national code of conduct.
We also recommend for education the support for research, development, and implementation of effective multimodal, stakeholder-specific, and interactive education to improve knowledge outcomes for all of these stakeholders. And we also recommend the support and promotion of education for clinical trainees and practicing clinicians alike that is competency-based, adequate, and consistent, as there is a current knowledge gap among clinicians. So our final recommendation, in which all of the 5 domains that we've just discussed actually fit, is for the federal government to move ahead with the 3 key priorities that have also been identified in the proposed bill C566, as we've previously mentioned.
So the first of these is a National Concussion Awareness Week, and this would help for us to improve education and awareness in the general population across the country.
The second is a pan-Canadian concussion strategy, including a National Center of Excellence for Concussion Research.
And the final one is a governmental concussion board, and this would be useful for evaluation, for accountability, but also continuity. So Canada has this unique position where we actually have this amazing opportunity to become leaders in the concussion policy landscape, but also to be proactive in terms of reducing the risk of concussions through prevention and to promote the well-being of our citizens. And we call upon our government to do so.
So we're really encouraged by the creation of this subcommittee and also the discussions that you've had thus far and the enthusiasm that we've seen. So we're really hopeful for a near future in which we see a comprehensive concussion strategy that is implemented across the country. Merci pour votre attention et votre temps. Nous les apprécions beaucoup.
Thank you for your time and attention. We really appreciate your listening to us.
For your presentation, and thank you for the document, because it, as Mr. Fisher has indicated, it's going to be very helpful for us to go through this and at a more leisurely time to actually have a look and then hoist what you brought forward to us. So we're going to start with some questions now, and we will start a 7-minute question, and we'll start with Mademoiselle Fontier.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, moi, je vais parler en français.
Thank you very much. I'll be addressing you in French. So if you understand French, that's fine. Otherwise, there are some small headphones that you can use to listen to the translation of my voice. Listen, this is quite fascinating what you've brought to us here today. I think that you have expressed yourself very clearly, and you have something very useful to bring us here at the committee. We've had the privilege from the outset of our work to hear athletes and parents, as well as coaches and representatives of associations. And we can see that there are a number of measures that the federal government could undertake in this area. Something that you said here was about prevention. You're speaking of a culture change. And perhaps I'm speaking too quickly here, but I do believe that you're telling us that this culture change should get underway. And what sort of culture change do you have in mind? What should we be trying to encourage based on your research? Thank you very much. I think I will respond in English with your permission. Thank you.
La prochaine fois en français. So we agree that a culture change is needed across the board. I mean, there's many ways and many areas to do that in. For example, at the level of professional sports, we need to see a change in culture of the way sport is played, the way we look at what sports means. From athletes' perspectives, from coaches' perspectives, the team's perspectives, but also the perspectives of fans and how we consume sports, as well as the media. But this can also go towards the level of grassroots sports, because it's not just going to be at the professional level. So kids are watching how athletes are playing in the professional leagues, but they're also, doing their own thing in their own leagues, and having some sort of change in the culture at that level is very important as well. We need to address this from all sorts of different perspectives.
Yeah, we recommend looking to the field of knowledge translation and behavior change for this. because there are strategies that have research behind it in terms of what works for a changing behavior. And one of the things that we would recommend is having, for example, champions for change for knowledge translation. So that would be people that we hold in high regard. So athletes, for example. So folks like Eric Lindros, who was here previously, Cassie Campbell-Pascal, Haley Wickenheiser, who's spoken publicly about her concussions, and having them share their experience and really start normalizing the idea of talking about concussions, because it's an invisible injury, so it's difficult to talk about. But also, in our experience playing hockey, you don't want to stop playing, and there's multiple reasons why folks don't want to stop and don't want to report. And reporting intention is a whole other question that we might get to today. But having a champion for change is something else that we do recommend, and also taking advantage of social media. In this day and age, there's a lot that can be done with communicating over social media and reaching, say, grassroots levels of hockey and other sports, as well as all the way up to elite levels. So taking advantage of that. And I think we've seen bits and pieces of that with the conversations and discussions that have been had, but a lot more can be done in a more strategic and very consistent manner for the point of having change in our culture.
And there's if we look at evidence-based change as well, so there are theories that are in the literature in terms of how we can actually make this change. So if we're thinking about behavior changes, we're thinking about intention for behavior change, but what are the other factors around that in terms of what we need to do? So looking at norms and attitudes and all these types of factors that we need to look at before we expect change to actually happen. And in terms of having a champion, we know that there are individuals out there, athletes, who are willing to speak about these types of things. For example, when we helped create a conference, the first one for women and girls in concussion in Toronto, the first one in Canada, Cassie Campbell-Pascal came and spoke, and that was such a wonderful thing, because that was a face that people recognize and can actually say, okay, this is something that's a really important issue because I see this person that I recognize is also talking about it.
Puis j'apprécie aussi beaucoup.
I really appreciate that one of your priorities, the second one, I think, about the Pan-Canadian strategy on concussions, if I understand correctly, a research unit, research base to work on this. We did hear a witness, I forget the name, but this person was studying brains, and I asked, and I think this was in football or rugby, by the way, but he was only looking at male brains. And at that time, given the research base he was working with, he couldn't look at women's brains. But you are bringing up the matter of gender. Perhaps you could say a little bit more about the challenge before us, how difficult it is to get gender balance data, and perhaps tell us why it's so important to ensure that we do.
Across lots of health research fields, not having representation of females in the research. And because females may respond differently to the injury or may have different factors that are pre-existing factors, we need to know whether there is a difference, and if so, what we need to do about that, because the way we manage the injury might be different. We don't know. We won't know until we look at those things and those factors.
And that's one of the reasons why we need more research, because we don't actually know for certain what's going on in terms of gender and sex considerations, although we know more than we did, say, a decade ago. And so it's very encouraging, and it's even more motivating to do more research in that area.
And at this time, we know that, for example, some of the research is suggesting that maybe females do have a different experience in terms of symptoms and so on. So there is research to say that we should be looking at this further, for sure. And there are even things, so there's some research to say that females might experience more symptoms and so on. But there are other considerations that we need to take. For example, females do report more symptoms at baseline before an injury at all. So maybe it's not that they are experiencing more symptoms after an injury. It's just that's the way that females are experiencing life.
Or perhaps they are. And in addition to that, there's potentially different mechanisms of the injury as well. So some research has shown that males tend to have more player contact as the mechanism of injury than females, and that's because there's a lot less contact, like intentional contact in, say, women's hockey or other sports. So looking at the mechanism as how we make change and how we actually do those prevention strategies is something that we also need to look at.
Ben, j'ai été témoin en fin de semaine.
I myself this weekend witnessed a female volleyball game, young ladies of 17 and 18 years of age, and about 3 of them on these teams couldn't play were asked to sit out because they had had a concussion. And I spoke to the parents. The parents are concerned, given that there isn't enough research being carried out, how to handle such situations. That's what they'd like to know. Sort of thing we see on a daily basis. I haven't much time, but
Une des mentions que vous avez
so something else that you have shared with us here, thinking about the federal level intervention, that's one thing, but also working with provinces and territory. Yes, if you have any time in your presentation or what you leave us with, give us a bit more of an idea of how you see us working with provinces, territories as well, and even the municipalities in this study.
We need to move on, so we'll move on to Ms. Hardcastle, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really intriguing. And I like seeing how you've laid out that our national strategy has to address not just prevention, not just looking at this as a public health issue, but also the issue of diagnosis, and the issue of research comes in, because if you don't have enough research, you can't diagnose. And then, so it's not just about prevention, and it's about treatment and innovative forms of treatment and being cutting edge on those innovative forms of treatment. And I know I read in your word cloud that you had at the beginning, and you know, if you've listened to some of the testimony, there is a gap in availability of treatment when it comes to some of the more complex emotional trauma symptoms and a physical symptom.
Et de symptômes physiques également. Donc, j'aimerais que vous m'en disiez davantage sur la façon dont on pourrait mettre de l'avant une stratégie nationale alors qu'on traite encore de questions comme vous l'avez dit, de questions d'harmonisation et de collecte de données et de partage de données sur les commotions. La première étape est de mettre sur pied un système de surveillance. Et il y a différentes façons de le faire aux États-Unis. Ils ont le NCAA, qui ont une base de données sur les blessures. Et le corollaire, c'est le système de rapports en ligne pour les écoles secondaires. Je pense que ça existe au moins depuis 10 ans. Et il y a une certaine homogénéité à l'échelle nationale. Donc peut-être qu'on pourrait s'inspirer de cela. Peut-être qu'on pourrait avoir un système semblable ici au Canada. Mais il y a une chose qui diffère ici au Canada, c'est que la personne qui entre les données, c'est le thérapeute, en tout cas aux États-Unis, mais ici, c'est pas évident au primaire ou au secondaire. Il faut voir qui entrerait les données, mais il existe des systèmes semblables ailleurs et on pourrait tirer des enseignements de ces systèmes. Quand on parle de prévention et de gestion, nous avons fait une proposition qui s'applique de façon générale, mais les gens vont continuer à avoir des commotions, donc il est important de gérer l'entrée des données. Comme chercheur, je suis très emballée parce que on peut faire preuve de beaucoup d'innovation. À l'heure actuelle, on prévoit, par exemple, des exercices pour que les gens reprennent leur vie normale. Et c'est très encourageant pour nous. On peut naturellement prévoir des exercices plutôt qu'un repos prolongé. Il y a différentes techniques de gestion selon les symptômes qui peuvent varier, surtout après 3 ou 4 mois. Donc, c'est important pour nous de poursuivre cette recherche. Les commotions ne disparaîtront jamais. Ce sont des accidents et on doit tout faire pour réduire les risques de commotion, mais il faut aussi bien gérer les blessures. Parlons des communications entre les divers paliers de gouvernement, du municipal au fédéral. Oui, il faut que tous les paliers se parlent, car souvent ça relève soit de l'éducation ou de la santé, mais il est important que l'approche soit harmonisée. Si on n'a pas cette harmonie, il y aura des failles, il y aura des lacunes et donc des problèmes de mise en œuvre. Donc, il est important que ce soit normalisé et il faudrait penser au rôle du gouvernement fédéral en la matière. Je pense que le fédéral a un rôle important à jouer. Et il faut s'assurer qu'il y ait une bonne communication entre les associations sportives, les universités qui font peut-être l'analyse de données, pour que vous ayez réponse à vos questions, à savoir quelles sont les prochaines étapes, est-ce qu'il y a une bonne évaluation et élaboration de politiques. Oui, en effet, notre rôle ici, c'est de gérer tout cela. Mais il me semble, enfin, vous connaissez les parachutes, ce qu'on appelle les parachutes. C'est-à-dire que ça peut devenir obligatoire. Je pense au parachutisme, par exemple. On prend de l'information à jour et il pourrait y avoir un centre où on retrouve cette information. C'est donc volontaire. Si vous êtes membre d'une organisation qui impose ces exigences, ça c'est une chose. Vous dites que vous vous attendez à ce que ce soit le gouvernement fédéral qui, dans une stratégie, rendrait certaines choses obligatoires. Pourriez-vous étoffer un peu pour nous? Honnêtement, dans le domaine de l'élaboration de politique, même dans le domaine des droits de la personne, il y a beaucoup de mesures qui sont volontaires. Pourriez-vous nous en parler davantage et nous dire comment on peut procéder?
So policy items are voluntary.
Oui, il y a beaucoup de politiques qui sont volontaires, mais il y en a également qui sont obligatoires. Et la recherche prouve que le volet volontaire aux États-Unis par rapport à l'élément obligatoire n'est pas aussi efficace parce que quand on a le choix, ben souvent les priorités diffèrent pour les uns et les autres et donc ça crée des failles. Quand c'est obligatoire, on n'a pas le choix. Oui, c'est sûr qu'il faudrait financer les organisations pour qu'elles satisfassent les exigences. Et il ne faut pas que cela prenne trop de temps pour l'organisation. Et il faut que ça paye à la longue et pour les athlètes et pour les entraîneurs et pour les organisations. C'est un changement de culture dont on a besoin. Il faut comprendre que c'est la responsabilité de tous. Merci infiniment. J'apprécie les commentaires. On est dans un sous-comité, donc je voudrais reconnaître qu'il y a ici des étudiants de l'Université d'Ottawa et Carleton, de futurs scientifiques. On apprécie que vous soyez ici pour en apprendre davantage. Cela étant dit, je profite de l'occasion pour intervenir et le greffier va m'interrompre dans 7 minutes.
Thank you very much for being here. In your conversation, and I appreciate your presentation, it's truly fabulous, and you step by step as you go through it. You talked about whiplash and the whiplash effect. And, you know, when I went to school, we learned about, and that's a few years ago, we won't say how many, but we studied about coup, contra coup type injuries and the reality of the strength of the cervical spine and how, and I'm interested to hear from you whether you've looked at that part in your research. And we've heard from other organizations about suggesting the strengthening of the cervical spine in our young athletes to try and minimize as a preventative measure. So comments, if you wouldn't mind.
So you mentioned a preventive measure, but my first comment is going to be about management. In some of the research that I'm doing right now, I mentioned that we're doing some exercises to help people get back to their normal functioning. And one of the areas that we focus on is the strengthening of the neck and neck exercises, because that is, even if it's not part of the actual concussion injury itself, you often see that co-occurring with the injury of concussion, where somebody has issues around their neck muscles, and something going on there. So that's certainly an area that we want to look at for sure. In terms of prevention, it's still kind of an area that's equivocal in the literature, but it seems like that would be a good area to look at in terms of strengthening the neck to prevent concussions.
With the stance of no harm done in most cases for neck strengthening. And while, again, very equivocal, there's some research that is positing that perhaps women and girls have less musculature of the neck, and so potentially that might be an approach for that avenue.
But of course, at the same time, women and girls, certain individuals may not have, like there could be one woman who has better neck musculature than a male and so on. So it's important to look at gender and sex and all of those factors as well.
And you did mention a bit about gender research, et cetera, and that's, I think, is important to see that and to talk about that. Because is that something that would be then recommended to the sport organizations or particular sports? Or do you see that, or do you see it in certain sports versus others?
So at this point, in terms of management, I don't know that we have enough information to say this is the way we're going to manage for females versus males. But there are particular considerations that we can take that can be applied to everybody that might be particularly useful for one or the other,
including mental health related management strategies too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you had a nice little visual display for us earlier, and I appreciate you pointing that out, because I recall back to my days in school and seeing, and I'll go back to the coup contra coup type of injury, and some theorists would say it's actually a coup contra coup type injury because of the whiplash effect that happens, and so some of the research has talked about that aspect of it. Can you tell us what you see or what you envision that's happening to the brain in that scenario?
Well, I think one of the things that is like the very key thing is that the brain is not tethered within the cerebrospinal fluid, so it does bump around and get damaged. And this conversation reminds me of the conversation we were just having recently about helmets. And how can, there's a conversation about, do helmets help prevent concussions, and so on and so forth. And again, incredibly equivocal, not recommended right now as like a prevention strategy that has very compelling evidence to say that helmets do prevent concussions. And that's because of the physics of collisions right now. There's 3 ways that can happen through helmets or could happen through helmets theoretically: absorbing energy, and currently through a viscoelastic deformation. We don't have materials that with compelling evidence can absorb enough energy to prevent a concussion, dissipating a force or dissipating energy over more space, which is a great thing that helmets do, transferring a potentially focal injury into a more diffuse injury, preventing fractures but not preventing concussions and more diffuse injuries such as those, and also dissipating energy over time, and just making that impact last longer on a helmet. And that could theoretically be very helpful, because with that, you would reduce the peak force and peak acceleration. But at this point in time, we don't have compelling evidence or knowledge on, what material that padding in the helmet could be that would dissipate the energy over enough time to have that effect.
There is some literature to suggest that full face protection could reduce potentially the severity of injury, but that's limited literature, so we definitely need more in that area. And also, we don't know what that threshold might actually look like. How many Gs of force do we need to actually have a concussion happen, and whether that changes per person. But also, just to comment on the pathophysiology in the brain, I think we need to have a lot more research done to actually really understand what's going on. We still don't fully understand what's going on when we get a concussion. But we know that there could be shearing in terms of the axons in the brain. The white matter and the gray matter are different densities, so they're moving at different rates. And that we know also that there's biochemical changes in the brain that can result in cell death and inflammation going on, as well as uncontrolled discharge in the brain that can result in seizure-like symptoms. So all these things are going on. We know this, and all these things could lead to the symptoms that we've talked about. But again, there's some amazing research being done in terms of imaging and so on, looking at what's happening.
Thank you.
Another reason for a National Center of Excellence in Concussion Research.
In your concluding statements, you talk about a National Concussion Awareness Week. Tell us what you mean by that. What does it entail? Is it purely we put that out there and then everyone forgets about it, or what do you envision of that?
Putting it out there
Is the first step.
Yep, is the first step, and doing that alone will show Canadians that the federal government cares about this issue
And is taking it seriously.
recognizing it as an issue of concern. But this can also mean doing kind of coordinated activities around educating Canadians about concussions. So there are already a lot of organizations who do some of this type of work. We're involved in a lot of this type of work ourselves as well. But making sure that there's a coordinated effort at this particular time it will make the effort in actually getting attention of Canadians so that we actually have people focusing on it. Yes, it would be just for that week potentially, but then it would reoccur and keep coming back, and people will actually start thinking about, okay, this is an actual injury, something I need to be concerned about, or actually connect that to things that they've experienced themselves or their friends or family have experienced, and make that start to be like a national conversation.
It's an opportunity for those who maybe don't think about it on a day-to-day basis to take pay attention to it and spend some time thinking about what that means to them. And I kind of think of it like Earth Day just happened. We do lots of activities around Earth Day. It's one day dedicated to a certain concept, and the National Concussion Awareness Week could be parallel to that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fisher?
Thank you very much. And what an improvement tonight in chair. Absolutely incredible job.
What a butter up.
Unfortunately, he asked a lot of the questions I wanted to ask. Thank you so much. Like, this is, and if you can, when I get a chance to go through that list of pages that you've got there, you had if you can go back to the slides there, one of your early slides, I don't know if it was a typo or just something we had not heard yet, but SEQUELA. I don't think this committee has heard that word, and when I looked at it, I think it might be on your second slide.
Is it? Is it on management?
Here, under management.
Can you tell me what education initiatives that include psychological, maybe everyone else in the committee knows, sequelae of concussion? Sequelae.
Yeah, so it's essentially the psychological or mental health consequences that occur after a concussive impact. We were just getting fancy there.
But the core of that is to say that education initiatives, some exist, and as we mentioned, there needs to be more work on these, but not a lot actually, and the literature shows this as well, not a lot actually include explicit mentions of the mental health effects of a concussion. And so people don't necessarily realize that this is something that can actually happen, and when it does happen, you
They
have
suffer
worse
alone.
effects.
Yeah.
So making sure that people are aware of this, both the people who might actually suffer a concussion and those around them, so that we know what to do about it and to
And
expect
how
it.
to find it, how to notice that it's happening in your peers.
Have either of you had concussions?
No.
So it's interesting because most of the people that have come here with a level of knowledge have gained that knowledge because of their adverse effects from
It
concussion.
just stems from our passion for hockey.
Perfect.
But we've also been lucky to be able, in doing this policy work that we've done previously, we have had so many opportunities to talk to Canadians who have suffered from concussions, as well as their families, caregivers, healthcare practitioners, and so on, across the country in many different
Work and
provinces
sport
and
and just
territories.
recreational activity.
And
that-
even internationally as well. So although we haven't experienced them personally, we've been able to engage with people who have, and then the research we're doing as well.
I'm not going in any specific order that I had planned here in my head, but National Awareness Week, I think, is a brilliant idea. I had a bill through the House of Commons that was a Senate bill on Sickle Cell Awareness Day, and it did just that. It had a national conversation on something that rarely ever had a national conversation. So I support that. You've got
Congratulations, that's
proposed legislation for a federal law. Is that something that you could provide to the committee? If you've, besides your slides, do you have proposed federal legislation that we could see?
Yeah, so
That was Bill 566.
That was
yeah,
Chris.
that was-
Okay, that
yeah.
was Kier. I got it. Okay, gotcha. That was 2010,
2014.
2014.
had its first reading.
So, in your remarks, one of you said, I get you mixed up already. One of you said that concussions are a growing problem, and I wonder whether we're actually getting more concussions or we're realizing more instances of concussion. So I'm not sure if you want to elaborate on that. Is it a growing problem? Are there more concussions today than there were? And is that because of hockey gear?
Yeah.
Is that because we've got, a guy that maybe trained playing hockey all summer working on a farm, and now a guy's lifting 330 pounds every day, and he's bigger, faster, and stronger.
So we had an interesting choice of words there, but in our opinion, every moment that we don't do something about concussions makes the problem a growing problem because there's more and more consequences of it. So that was why. When we're talking about statistics, it's an interesting question because it's an invisible injury, and there's lots of reasons why people don't report it. So it's very underreported and under-recognized, and we don't have a very solid tracking system for it. So that's another way that we're losing the ability to actually say the statistics that are out there are the true statistics of the true picture of what's happening. In terms of the numbers and how things have changed over time, I agree with you that the increase that we do see, for example, in Ontario, just data from the research I'm doing right now, in 2003, we saw just over 2,000 concussions per 100,000 children and youth aged 4 to 18. And in 2017, the numbers that were recorded for diagnoses of concussions it depends again on the definition that you use, but the definition that we used was over 4,000 per 100,000.
Baseline studies, though, back in 2002, they didn't do baseline back then, did they?
Don't know what you mean by.
Well, I guess so. My son plays hockey, and they didn't start doing baseline testing of an athlete's brain until he was, I don't know, 13 or 14. And now I think they started with younger kids much earlier.
Yeah.
Now, you also said that
but that's why. So that change, that almost more than doubling there, can potentially be attributed to a heightened awareness. And so we're reporting more now. We're seeing a lot more reporting.
Honest
which is
reporting.
Very, very encouraging. But we do know that there's a lot still falling through the cracks. So there's more work to be done.
How much of that falling through the cracks is a male athlete as opposed to a female athlete not wanting to report because he doesn't want to be benched?
We don't know in terms of male versus female, and
report more honestly and baseline.
Typically, that is the case.
But you're right. So in this picture, there are people who don't want to report, and so we just don't see those concussions coming up in the stats. We can kind of guess at that, and typically male athletes are going to be the ones who are not reporting as much. But at the same time, there are other factors, as you were mentioning, too. So if you're looking at the equipment and looking at, the way people play the sport and thinking there's something called the gladiator effect. So if you're putting on so much equipment and it's getting harder and tougher and thicker or whatever, people...
As opposed to leather.
Exactly. And so now...
Invincible.
Exactly. So people will feel invincible and like they can do anything on the ice, but then you're also forgetting that, that person's head is their head and there's a brain inside there that you need to protect. And that, sure, they're wearing all this equipment, but you can still give them a concussion. And you kind of lose that sense of the responsibility to take care of your body and other people's bodies. So that's another factor that can play into it in our current time and day right now. But there's lots of factors that play into that for sure.
There's other reasons why people don't report their concussion. For example, say you're talking about a student athlete, and this has been shown in some of the literature, they don't want to make their coach upset. They don't want to make their parents upset. They don't want to lose the opportunity for a scholarship. They don't want to...
Scholarship they already have.
Exactly. And they don't want to, and I mean, I'm guilty of this for a shoulder injury. You don't want to lose any playing time because you're doing something that you enjoy. Or maybe it's the playoffs and you don't want to lose the opportunity for that and let your team down. And knowing all of these reasons are really, really helpful and important because then we can start addressing them. So if, for example, a student athlete's worried that their coach is going to be upset, then we can address that and have education perhaps where both of them are sitting at the same table, making sure that there's a common understanding and expectation for reporting of concussions.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
I gave you a little extra. Thank you. So we're now going to go into 5-minute questions, and so we're going to start with Mr. Richards.
Good, thank you. Actually, I probably, the order worked out quite well, I think, Mr. Chair, because I think Mr. Fisher asked some of the questions I was going to ask, but there's also some things that led into what I wanted to ask about, so it worked out quite well. First thing I wanted to ask about is actually in regards to medical treatment and sort of the protocols around that and what's changed in the last number of years. I'll be honest, I don't know, some of the members here have probably been through a number of meetings on this. I'm just here as subbing in today, so I'm I may be behind in terms of my knowledge compared to some of the others on the committee, but in terms of medical treatment, so I'm just gonna, I guess I'll go back and give you some history myself, so I played hockey as a young guy. I had concussions. I'm not actually sure how many exactly, but back then, it was just kind of, how many fingers am I holding up? If you knew that, and maybe give you a whiff of a smelling salt or something, and back at it. The only time I can ever remember anyone, a teammate, ever being sent for any kind of medical treatment at all was a teammate that after the game one time, I think he'd been hurt in the first or second period, and after the game he couldn't remember who won the game, what the score had been, or what town we were in. That time he got sent for some to be looked at, but they didn't know what to do with him. I'm pretty sure he played again, maybe not the next day, but probably the next week. And I can even think back to my son about, he's 23 now. He would have been probably 12 years old, so a little over 10 years ago. This wasn't a hockey injury, but we were at a hockey camp, and we'd gone a few days early. It was on a lake, so he was wakeboarding and got a concussion, and they said, well, just be careful the first couple of days of the hockey camp, but should be good, right? And that's about all the medical treatment was. And I'll be honest, given my experience that I'd had previously with that, when I had a concussion a few years ago in a car accident, I just thought, what's the point? I'm not going to bother going to the hospital, because I'll just get on the bike every once in a while and see how it feels, right? Until it's good, because they're not going to do anything anyway. I'm assuming that's changed. Can you tell me a little bit about what that now looks like when someone goes to the hospital, goes to see a doctor about a concussion? What kind of protocols do they go through now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the sport context, for healthcare practitioners, there's something called the SCAT-5 right now, which is a sport concussion assessment tool, where there's a bunch of questions and things that they can go through with the athlete to kind of get that first impression of whether they have a concussion or not, and whether they suspect the injury, and then go on from there. If they're not a healthcare practitioner, there's a tool called the concussion recognition tool, where it's a similar thing, having somebody else who's not a healthcare practitioner being able to use that to try and see if there's a suspected injury, and then going on from there. In terms of the actual management of the injury, you'll probably recognize the idea of rest, complete cognitive and physical rest, which used to be kind of the cornerstone of what was done. But we're kind of moving away from that now, because we know that having complete rest, particularly for prolonged periods of time, can be quite problematic. So you're increasing things such as isolation and frustration, and addressing all those mental health issues that could be cropping up, but also deconditioning, particularly in athletes who are used to be doing a lot of exercise and movement and physical activity for quite some period of time. So introducing exercise earlier seems to be a really good idea, and there's a lot of work that's being done on that. Some of my own research right now, we're trying to get people to do exercise earlier in their recovery period. There's even some literature to say that the earlier you do this type of exercise, which is aerobic exercise, the better your outcomes might actually be, and your recovery time might reduce as well. But there are different types of management therapies and things that are being used for example, persistent symptoms. So you might have persistent symptoms in the vestibular, ocular realm of things with balance and vision and this type of thing. And there are particular therapies that are being developed for those symptoms, because we see these symptom clusters crop up as a particular thing for individuals, but that can be different for individual to individual.
Generally, what's been developed over the years, as you'll probably recognize by the International Sport and Concussion Group, is the graduated return to activity. So it's return to play because it's in the context of sport, but that is the typical idea now for a graduated return to whatever it is that you're doing. And in schools, you'll see the return to play and return to learn as well. And you touched on the concept of, or the idea that sometimes clinicians may not know what to do, and that is something that is a bit of an issue in some areas. So one of the things we mentioned was the gap in knowledge for clinicians and clinical trainees alike, and that is something that is not just a Canadian issue. There's research coming out of Singapore and Croatia and the States also saying that clinical trainees and clinicians, practicing clinicians, may not have as much knowledge about concussions because they're not trained about it necessarily. I think at U of T, maybe the medical school that I'm going to is one of the perhaps luckier ones where we have Dr. Charles Tatter, who is giving us some knowledge on concussion, but that's not the case across the board. So we really do need to see consistent and adequate and competency-based education for clinicians. And there is research that was in Boston where there is a primary care hospital where they saw a change in terms of the concussion care that was given after an in-person and online, so a combination multimodal education program, and an improvement in concussion care. So it's possible even in practicing clinicians, whether or not they had that emphasis on concussion in their clinical training. We do, although I will say, in terms of continuing medical education, we do need to stay away from unregulated certification, just to make sure that it is adequate and that it is competency-based and it is consistent across the board. But it's possible.
Thank you very much. I hate to interrupt when there's such important information being put out on the table. Mr. Fergus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for testifying before the committee. I'm not a regular member of this committee, but I'm one of the people who had suffered from a concussion, and the reason why I want to tell you this little story is just because I think it's people like me who are the problem. Before about concussion, I had my concussion falling off a bike riding to work. Is that I used to think a lot of these professional athletes were exaggerating. Geez, I got hit, that's just a problem. Until I fell off my bike, and it wasn't a huge thing. I wasn't being pounded against the wall. I just fell off my bike and hit my chin on the ground and couldn't read for a week. I just couldn't focus. It was tough. It was a terrible thing. And I realized that's, aside from a lot of humility, it's people like me who are the problem, who don't recognize that this is a serious concern. Mr. Fisher and Mr. Richards also pointed out that quite often coaches or even athletes themselves might not recognize it, or might take steps to always try to downplay the severity of what's happening. We know this is a brain injury now. Your recommendation for us to work with the provinces and to try to work with schools, it seems that we even have to go a little bit further. We just had to get to the general population to let them to have them appreciate that not all injuries are only things you can see. There are things obviously that you can't see, but which have grave physical and mental effects. How do we break through that ice? What's your recommendation to try to get that general knowledge out there?
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll start by saying it's also people like you who are part of the solution, because look at where you are now on the subcommittee, so thank you. But to get to the general public, getting through to schools and sports organizations perhaps is a little bit more clear, because there's an organization and there are standards and a structure in how to communicate with them. But the National Concussion Awareness Week is one of the ways that we want to get through to the public in general, and having that conversation so that it's something that is brought up in the lives of people who maybe don't think about it on a day-to-day basis.
Would you be able to point to other physical conditions that have penetrated, that we've actually been able to go from a policy recommendation to actual culture change on the ground in schools, amongst families? Are there any other examples or best practices that we can turn to?
Well, smoking is one that comes to mind, for sure. Not an injury, but public health, for sure. Seatbelt wearing is another one that comes to mind. There was policy on bike helmets as well, and on the East Coast, I think, if I'm not correct. I'm not an expert on that area for sure. But I think there are policies and strategies and conversations that have been had in Canada previously that we can look to for motivation and for hoping to see that change can be made, and it is possible.
But I think you make a really, really fantastic point, because we need to reach the general population for sure, which is something that we're really interested in as well, because it's not just elite athletes who are going to be suffering concussions. It's going to be elite athletes who you see suffering concussions in the media, but of course, everybody else can suffer the same injury. And some of the work that we've been doing in terms of science outreach and outreach in general that reaches more of the general population can be at one place that this happens, where there's some sort of structure in terms of an organization that does outreach as one of their goals and communication, but that's going towards the general public. For example, the Royal Canadian Institute for Science or Let's Talk Science are two examples that we've worked with, as well as Parachute Canada. But these are geared towards the general public rather than elite athletes or specific to schools. Let's Talk Science is for schools as well. But these are some ways that we can use to kind of make sure that there's a channel to getting to the general public. But again, the National Concussion Awareness Week and starting that conversation, making it a national conversation, making sure there's attention on this issue, making sure that people know Canadians know that the government sees this as an issue that is of concern and that we need to be talking about can be a way to do that as well.
And so just to reiterate, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There are organizations that already reach the public and already recognize. So people already go there. They already have an audience. And so partnerships, as we were mentioning earlier, that the federal government may have is not just with the provincial, territorial, and sport organizations. It can also be with science communication organizations that already reach the target audiences that you're looking to reach with policy.
Merci beaucoup. Puis j'aimerais céder la parole.
Thank you very much. And I will like to offer Ms. Hardcastle a little more time for her questions. Thank you.
Finish up with 3 minutes with Ms. Hardcastle.
Thank you very much. I'll try and be quick. I know this is an emerging issue and it's quickly evolving, so I don't think we have the best template yet for how we would roll out these protocols you're talking about. And you mentioned the governmental concussion board in your conclusion. I envision maybe something more like a commissioner or secretariat with an administrative body behind it. But the point actually is more about, I want to go back to, because it is publicly funded, I want to go back to the Canadian concussion strategy that was developed by Parachute. So in Ontario, there's a law, Rowan's Law, that has a mandatory protocol. So would Rowan's Law, if you're familiar, would Ontario's law be able to be implemented using Parachute's Canadian concussion guidelines? Or are there some gaps, or is there a contradictory area?
I think certainly. Rowan's Law is continuing to be developed in terms of exactly how it's going to be implemented across Ontario. Its, I suppose, predecessor, which is Policy Program Memorandum 158, which is currently being implemented across schools. So it's focused on the school setting across Ontario, so public and Catholic schools, elementary and secondary schools. And through that, we, I think, can have a very good uptake of harmonized guidelines such as that of Parachute. I don't see any contradictions in terms of that, but I think where it becomes a question is implementation and relevance to the particular target audience.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, it's important that we can implement the Ontario piece everywhere else in Canada, but to take into consideration the particular, for example, cultural and other types of factors that are important to each province and territory, because that won't necessarily be the same as Ontario's situation in every case, but to apply the general idea of what's going on and see how that fits within their contexts, and then sharing information, of course, as well, and what works, what doesn't work, and evolving from there, because this is an evolving issue.
Yeah, but our vision is indeed to see something like that rolled out across the country in each province and territory.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I would like to, on behalf of the committee, thank both of you for your excellent presentation today and providing the information and disseminating so much important information to us. We greatly appreciate that. We're going to suspend the committee for 5 minutes while we change panels. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
start the committee again. I'd like to welcome Mr. Gordon Stringer, who is the father of Rowan Stringer, who died in 2013 after sustaining a head injury while playing rugby. Mr. Stringer is an advocate for concussion awareness and education. And so, Mr. Stringer, I welcome you to our committee and look forward to you having a presentation. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'd also like to thank the committee, and particularly Mr. Fisher, for facilitating my appearance here. As was mentioned, my daughter Rowan passed away in May of 2013 from blows she suffered playing high school rugby. She took a hit in a game on May the 8th, which is a Wednesday. She lost consciousness on the field, was transported to the Children's Hospital here in Ottawa. In spite of all the interventions that they could do, being the world-class facility that they are, we know that she got the very best of care. She succumbed to her injuries on Sunday the 12th. Since then, we've been involved very heavily in particularly learning about concussion. I could probably have written on a post-it note what I knew about concussions before what happened to Rowan. I'm considerably more knowledgeable now. About 2 years after her death, May of 2015, a coroner's inquest was held here in Ottawa to look into all of the information around what happened to her before the fatal concussive event. That inquest was called for by Dr. Charles Tatter, who I believe Charles has addressed you already. At the time, I didn't know Dr. Tatter at all. I've learned very much since then how valuable it is that he became involved in this. He's an incredible man. From that inquest, there were 49 recommendations that were made by the jury. Very insightful recommendations, I must say. The unfortunate thing with inquests is that things that come out of them don't necessarily ever get acted upon. I didn't know that beforehand. I naively thought, well, here we have 49 recommendations, things are going to get done. That's not necessarily the case. I approached my local MPP at the time and said, what can we do to make these get acted upon? A private member's bill was put through Queen's Park, co-sponsored by a member from each of the three main parties. It was unanimously passed. And we had the first concussion legislation in Canada passed through at Queen's Park. But that first piece of legislation was only speaking to forming of a committee, which was to advise the Ontario government on how best to implement those 49 recommendations. I served on the subsequent committee with very learned people. I felt quite humbled being around the table with these folks, many of whom have spoken here. Eric Lindros, Charles Tatter, Paul Hunter, to name a few. That committee, after 1 year, came out with the creation of Rowan's Law report. Oops. Anyway, I'm missing. There we go. It is available online. In it, there are 21 action items for the government of Ontario. The first was creating Rowan's Law, which was passed into law last year in March. Along with the passage of the law, there was the creation of Rowan's Law Day, which will happen every year on the last Wednesday of September in Ontario. Last September 26th was the first Rowan's Law Day in Ontario. We had incredible participation from the education field, from the healthcare field, from the sports community in that day. I was heartened to hear in the previous presentation talk of a week. I think that would be incredible. And if that moves forward, I think consideration should be given around making that week central around Rowan's Law Day, which is in Ontario. The day was picked for Rowan's Law Day specifically because it's a day that nothing else, no other kind of day of falls on that day. But also it is early enough in the school year that schools, sports teams, etc., have an opportunity to discuss Rowan's story, concussions, protocols, etc., such that kids get a start on the school year and on their sports with this base of education and knowledge. Age appropriate, of course. It can't be the same across the board. You can't teach a grade 3 student the same level as you can teach a grade 9 student. It has to be an appropriate base of knowledge. What we have now is there is a working group that has been established in Ontario. I again have the honor of being asked to serve on that working group, which is now working on helping the government to implement the rest of the action items that have not yet been fully implemented in Ontario. I was heartened to hear that last week a call for commentary went out from the government of Ontario regarding regulations, code of conduct, etc., that will form an addressing some of the action items. So commentary is open on those aspects of the bill and the act until April 14th. Other things I've learned over the last 6 years are things I'm sure you've already heard, but I will reinforce them. There's a gap, there's voids in the treatment system, the management system in Canada for people that suffer from concussion, post-concussion syndrome. Unfortunately, those gaps and voids get filled like a vacuum. Eventually they get filled, and they're not necessarily filled with the right things. I've heard it referred to as there's been a somewhat of a cottage industry that has popped up with respect to concussions. People hanging shingles out, claiming their expertise in the area of concussions, and when people can't get access to the primary, secondary, or tertiary care that they need, they will go to whatever is available. That's not necessarily a good thing. There's a definite need for frontline healthcare providers, particularly clinicians, family physicians, to update their education in the concussion area. You've no doubt heard that 70 to 80% of concussions will resolve within, depending on who you talk to, it's generally 4 to 8 weeks. Those are the people that need to be seen by their primary care physician, and those primary care people need to be able to triage them. They need to have the education to be able to tell whether or not they can look after them or whether they need to be referred further on. But when they get to the point of being referred, there is a huge gap out there in proper facilities that they can go to, multidisciplinary clinics where they can be addressed. Another phrase I've learned over the last 6 years is when you've seen a concussion, that is what you've seen, is one concussion. Myriad of problems that people and combinations. It's a constellation of issues. And you don't necessarily have just one or two. You may have 6 or 7. You may only have 1 or 2, but all of them at some point need to be addressed. That being said, we do have excellent examples of such facilities already in Canada. Dr. Shannon Bauman, Concussion North in Barrie, excellent facility. I believe, yeah, Dr. Bauman has been here. Dr. Michael Ellis in Winnipeg, the Pan Am Clinic. People out in Calgary, there are clinics in Toronto, Montreal, McGill, Laval. Examples do exist, but they need to be replicated. People need to be able to have access to them when they need that beyond their primary care physician care. Here in Ottawa, we have the CHEO Clinic run by Dr. Goulet. He desperately needs to expand his capacity there. He needs support and funding for that. He's doing the best he can for the kids, but it's not enough. He doesn't have. That's something that also needs to be addressed, is the capacity issue across Canada. I think I'll leave my comments for now at that, and I welcome any questions you have regarding
Thank
What I said.
you, Mr. Stringer, and thank you for your heartfelt testimony. It's very appreciative, and hopefully you can add more as the questions as they do come. So I appreciate that. Ms. Fontier.
Oh, I get to start. Thank you very much for being here and sharing your testimony. And honestly, I would prefer hearing you sharing with us what else and what the federal government should be looking at. If you have any specific recommendations that we could look at, I would appreciate hearing that from you.
Well, I know from my career working for the federal government and 12 years at the health department, there are jurisdictional issues when it comes to health. That being said, I truly believe that the federal government, being the place where a lot of the funding, the money originates, can have a role in influencing what happens at the provincial levels. We have Rowan's Law in Ontario now. Over the next couple of years, all of the action items are going to be implemented. Things like the gaps in education for the medical area. That was one of the recommendations, ensuring that healthcare practitioners have updated education in that, ensuring that the curricula in universities for medical schools, this will be particularly in Ontario, but I do believe it needs to be expanded across Canada. More education in this area is provided, particularly in the ER, family practitioners, clinicians area. Those frontline people that see the kids and the people coming in the doors first. I believe we have a template in Rowan's Law that can be replicated across Canada in each province. We've had the catastrophic event. We've had the inquest. We've had the recommendations. We've had 1 year of experts sitting around the table talking about how best to do this. We've had the action items presented. We have a government that is in process of implementing all of those action items. It doesn't necessarily have to be a one-size-fits-all. as your just previous witnesses said. But I think the template is there. A lot of the heavy lifting has been done. Replication of it, I believe, should be relatively straightforward, given, of course, the unique circumstances of each jurisdiction. That is understandable. But I think the blueprint is there, much like the blueprint is there for many of the multidisciplinary clinics that do need to be replicated across the system to improve access. But the template is there in Rowan's Law. And I'm working now to try to encourage other provinces and jurisdictions to adopt something similar, be it by legislation or policy or regulation. It really doesn't matter to me as long as the spirit of it and the force of it is there. And I think the federal government can have a role in encouraging that type of adoption across the country.
With the work that is being done right now in Ontario, and I didn't go through all of the documentation, but are you aware if there's a evaluation of Rowan's Law that will be done in a few years to see if there's something else that should be addressed? Because as you're saying, it's a template. So is there an exercise of making sure that we review or there's a revision of that law?
Yes, there will be. Actually, there's mandated that there will be annual reports on pardon me?
Annual reports?
Annual reports, okay. Yes. And the initial recommendation was every 2 years, but through the public commentary process, it was actually changed to annual reports that will be done on what has been accomplished with respect to the action items and how it is functioning. So I believe it can also be an evergreening process. Some of the elements that will be required, which is information portals, etc., they will be evergreen. They will be updated as better information comes forward. And really, what we want to do is have those portals being the ones that people go to. One thing that what we learned through the inquest was Rowan did Google concussion, but the information that came up was not helpful. It wasn't the stuff that she needed to go and see. What we need is to ensure that the first thing that comes up when people search elements of concussion are things like the government portal, where the very best, the very newest, very most up-to-date information can be found. Places like Parachute need to be the ones that pop up for people to seek out information on that. So there does need to be some work there as well with respect to ensuring that the right, most up-to-date information gets into the hands of people. Be that combined with a public service announcement program during a concussion week. There are many things, many ways that can be done, but a very important thing is that they do get the right information when they do search for it.
Thank you.
And now, Mr. Richards.
Hi. First, I just want to say how sorry I'm sure we all are. I think I can speak on behalf of everybody for your loss. And I also want to commend you for the courage that you have shown in taking something that is a horrible tragedy for you personally and your family and trying to do something to help others. That takes a lot of courage, and it's something that deserves to be commended completely. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it.
I want to start with a question that I think is going to be a very difficult question, and one that probably isn't comfortable to answer. But I'm going to ask it, and if you're not comfortable, it's okay. But it's important. I think it's an important question because it really gets to the heart of everything. Is there something that had we known, if someone had better education, or something that didn't exist then that should exist, could your daughter's death have been prevented?
Absolutely.
Okay, can you tell us, maybe elaborate on what exactly it is that we need to learn then to make sure that we can prevent others from going through what you did?
Well,
And
the-
I know it's a very difficult question. But
no,
I know you appreciate its importance. So.
it's not one I haven't been asked before. So, the medical expert at the inquest into Rowan's death was Dr. Charles Tatter, and his conclusion was, one of his conclusions was, and the one that rings with me and drives me every day, was that Rowan Stringer's death was preventable. When we look back through the benefit of 2020 hindsight, there were several indicators in the May 3rd to May 8th period where she suffered 3 hits to the head, where interventions could have been made had people known or been able to recognize or could see what was going on. She had a headache. She took a hit in a game on Friday afternoon. My wife and my daughter were at that game. It was a tournament. They had left, so they didn't see the event. They had left to, as Canadians do, go to Tim Hortons. And when they got back, Rowan was off the field. They didn't think anything of it. It was the last game of the tournament. She had been playing all day. Nobody said anything to them. Rowan didn't say anything about why she was taken off the field. So right there, somebody could have said something. Nobody did. The next day, she had a headache. She was a kid who had headaches. This was not something that was ever unusual. She took medication, Advil or whatever it was. The next day she was fine. Sunday was great. She was herself. She felt good. We never even considered that it was a concussion that happened. Monday she took she played another game on Monday with the school. Apparently she got a knee to the head in that game. Again, coaches didn't say anything to us. Rowan didn't say anything to us. We weren't at the game. She came home. She had an enormous bruise on her calf. And of course, concussion is invisible to everyone. Our focus was on the purple bruise on her leg. And so, that's where the focus was. We were like, you should look after that. I said all this kind of stuff. No mention of a hit to the head. No, nobody said anything. Tuesday, she took a driver's test. She failed, which was actually shocking to me. She was a very good driver. I had full confidence that she was going to go in and pass that with flying colors without issue. But she failed. So it was a bit of a shock, but kids fail their driver's test. It happened. It was an unhappy event for her, but nothing that really rang any bells with the knowledge that we had. During the inquest, though, it was very interesting because they called in her driver's test examiner, and he said he had to go back in the file and pull it out, her results. And he said, if I looked at that today, not knowing who it was for, he said, I would have, in my years of experience, said it was probably an elderly person who was trying to retain their license. There were judgmental errors that would speak more to a person who lacked the ability to make good judgments on distance, sight, making good decisions, etc. That was very telling in itself. She was texting with her friends, texting about, I might have a concussion. Do I have a concussion? I don't know. Nobody knew. Nobody, someone said, one of her friends said, I've had concussions. If you have a concussion, you'll know you have a concussion. There's no question about it. Well, She didn't know. She wasn't sure. Other friends just said, oh, you know, play the next game, and if it's still bad, then maybe get somebody to look at it. So the education part of it, just people, kids, friends around her knowing, coaches, all of those people having more education and ability to recognize, or speaking up to somebody, just saying, you know, she took a hit to the head. You might want to have her looked at. We took her off because of XYZ, whatever it happened to be. So going back over that with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, there were plenty of opportunities for intervention. One thing that happened during her final game was the girl that did the, and it was by the laws of the game, an illegal tackle. It was a swing tackle. Rowan was carrying the ball. She was grabbed by her jersey and thrown, which is not allowed in the laws of the game. She did this to another player earlier in the game, and the official merely gave her a warning. It should have been a penalty or possible expulsion from the game. So again, you have rules. You need to apply the rules. You need to penalize on your rules and laws. Had she been penalized, had she been removed from the game, there's a good chance that Rowan would not have received the very same tackle that she delivered to another player, and that resulted in her demise. So looking back, there are all kinds of areas there where interventions could have been made, you know, and it doesn't lie with just other people. Ourselves, we look back at it all the time and say, there were so many different times. Excuse me.
No worries.
When had we known, we could have done something. My last words to Rowan on Wednesday morning were, I dropped her off at school and I said, you know, we're still focused on the knee, right? I said, you know, maybe you should think about sitting out the game today. Your knee's not looking very good. And it was the typical, oh, come on, Dad. You know, I've played through shoulder injuries and I'm feeling all right. My knee will be okay and all that stuff. There were a lot of potential interventions there where, had people had the knowledge, the insight, the education, outcomes could have definitely been different. And what came out of the inquest were a lot of recommendations that deal with that. Rowan's Law speaks to a lot of those, particularly the education, awareness, and prevention pieces. There needs to be a cultural change. What I've learned over the last 6 years is we're not going to get leadership from the professional levels of sport, unfortunately. Rugby has done quite a good job at the player level. Rugby Canada in particular, the work of Paul Hunter and the folks at Rugby Canada since what happened to Rowan has been extraordinary, but they're not finished. They're constantly looking to better themselves. I can't say that about a lot of the other sports. I think they're making small steps in the right direction. And I hope that Rowan's Law in Ontario will influence bigger steps. But it really does need to be a cultural change that comes from the ground up, which is why I have such a strong affinity towards getting it into the education system, getting it into the community sports. The kids are going to drive this as time goes on. They're going to go through a system that says it's important to look after your brain. You know, these are things that you have to look out for yourself, for your teammates, for your family, for your friends. Speak up if you see something that happens. The same way they drove programs like recycling. The kids were the ones who were coming home and saying, hey, what are you putting that in the garbage for? Put it over there in the recycling, right? They're going to drive it, but that's a long-term game. In the short term, we need to get everyone educated. It really is as we said at the advisory committee, it takes a village in this case. Everyone has to be on board. Parents, administrators, officials, coaches, trainers, athletes, friends. Everyone has to be on board with this and participate actively and be forthright. You cannot rely on the brain-injured athlete to self-declare that they've got a problem. Their judgment, as was seen in Rowan's case, is not right necessarily. They're not going to necessarily have the faculties about them to make that decision for themselves. So they need someone else to speak up for them.
Ms.
Thank you,
Hardcastle?
just thank you for sharing. I know no matter how many times you've had to do it before, that's not easy, and that means a lot, and I think it makes a difference. So thank you.
A minute
or two. What have I
A
got?
minute, yep, a couple questions.
Okay.
We'll swing it with this one.
Yeah, okay, good. I appreciate that. Oh, you know, if I can call you Gord, your conviction is so admirable. I don't want to get choked up. We're going to try and keep it up here, but we get it. And you know that Rowan's story and your passion for this really has motivated a lot, like is a huge part of what we're doing here and talking about what is the federal role. And I think maybe if we could just kind of riff on that a little bit, like you did very well a minute ago, but what do you think is the federal role? And should each province have their own Rowan's Law to roll something out regionally, provincially, and then have a federal? I'm just assuming because you mentioned your professional career, you must have some bureaucratic insights and where we should be maximizing what we do as we move forward.
I think the steps that have been taken, particularly with the FPT work that has been ongoing on concussions, is a really good first step. Getting all of those sports organizations, the NSOs, involved in this and buying into something it has to happen. They have to be the drivers of this. My concern is the trickle down from there and how effectively and efficiently that happens. What I've noticed in Ontario is that, from my perspective at least, the provincial sports organizations seem to have a better mechanism to get things down to the community level. So relying on a national sports organization may not be the best bet at this time, but they do definitely have to buy in and at least monitor what their PSOs are doing and ensuring that their PSOs are getting the messages out. As far as the federal role, because of the jurisdictional divisions, I really do feel that having something in each province and territory is probably the best way to go. Having some kind of overarching, kind of maybe as they call it, a 30,000-foot view or whatever from the federal government as to things they would like to see happen and encourage to happen would probably be a good idea. but I think we will probably get more bang for the buck if we actually do get each province and territory on board with some kind of either a replicate of the existing Rowan's Law or something that is similar in however they may want to implement it at their own levels. I see a federal government role, public service announcements. You know, if you're going to have a week, or if you're going to promote sport, have that as part of the sport promotion piece, have it part of health promotion piece, have a federal portal where people can get the best and brightest information on this. Support from the federal level into research, I think, really needs to happen. We're fortunate that Dr. Michael Strong from Western University is now at CIHR. He was a huge, very important advocate for work in the concussion area. I hope that he will carry that over into his role at CIHR, and we'll see increased funding in that area, or better targeted funding. We have an embarrassment of riches in Canada when it comes to research in this area. We punch way, way above our weight in the world in concussion research. We have such incredible people doing work here that, you know, the folks in Calgary, the folks at Western, the folks in Toronto, McGill, Laval, all across it's incredible what Canada is doing in this area. If you look at the attendance and the memberships on committees that were at the Berlin Consensus Conference, Canada is in there well beyond what anyone would expect from a country of our size, at least population-wise. These people are doing incredible work, and they need to be supported. You know, what a telling factor is that the NFL recently made a huge grant to the people at Calgary to do some work. The fact that they got the second biggest grant out of that from the NFL, that speaks volumes as to the quality of work that's being done here in Canada. It really needs to be supported, because there are so many unanswered questions that, but we can be the leader on that. We are leaders in a lot of the areas now, and we can continue to be.
Mr. Fisher?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Stringer. I couldn't do what you did. So the template is there. You say you're working with other provinces. What's your success rate? Have you talked to Nova Scotia?
No, I have not talked to Nova Scotia, although I know there is interest there.
Happy to help.
I've been working, I can't say closely, but I've been working with people in Manitoba. Dr. Michael Ellis is driving a lot of the stuff there. They did have legislation tabled. It hasn't really moved, I don't believe, beyond first reading. My understanding was that they were kind of waiting to see how Ontario did with Rowan's Law. I'm hoping that there's going to be now new impetus for them to move forward. I've started with some folks in Alberta. I know there's interest in BC, but the government doesn't seem to be receptive. There's a grassroots interest in BC, but the government doesn't seem to be receptive to it.
Happy with Rowan's Law? Are you happy with Rowan's Law as it's written? Are you happy with the recommendations and the 21 action items? And are you happy with the way it's rolled out, notwithstanding the fact that government has changed from when it started to when it's in the process of implementation? So, I mean, Are you happy with the progress that's been made to this day?
Yes, on all counts.
So that's the template that we want to send across the country.
I believe it's worth a lot of consideration. The recommendations that came out of the inquest, I was kind of gobsmacked at the end of it. These were 5 people on the jury that were just people from Ottawa. What they produced was so insightful. You could tell from that they really were engaged and paying attention. The support at the provincial level from the legislature, again, was incredible. It took I'd love for things to move faster than they do all the time.
Government, though.
But yeah, having my history in government, I know that things take time. But the unanimous support in the legislature was huge, and it carried over from the change in government. The first Rowan's Law Day fell under the first year of the new government there. From all indications that I've had so far, they are moving on this file. This file is moving. It is. I had the opportunity last Rowan's Law Day at Queen's Park to meet with the Premier, and he gave me his word that this would be acted upon. And from what I can see, it is being delivered. As quickly as I would like to, of course not, but it's happening. I believe that the action items address a lot of the issues, if not all of the issues that need to be addressed with respect to, legislation, awareness, education, prevention, management, treatment, surveillance. All those pieces are there. It's going to take time to implement all of them. That's fully understandable. It's not something that can be rolled out overnight. But I believe that if you look at the report, much of what needs to be addressed outside of the research piece is spoken to here, and it's spoken to in a way that really will get to the crux of the issues that are there.
I still have a bit of time.
15 seconds.
I couldn't even touch on this in 15 seconds. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'm going to, I'm the next rotation to ask a question, and I'll just ask one very quick question, and then we'll move on. But my question is, and you pointed out, and I thank you for your testimony, when you talked about Rowan and people missing steps during those days, those 4 or 5 days. And one of the things that we've been heard from a lot of people in the committee is about data collection and an app that might collect that data so that someone, and the challenges you have in that is, and I go by my old age where the computer is only as smart as the person who puts the information in the computer. So there's an organization called Complete Concussion Management, which has an app that allows for that input of information right away and allows for trying to protect privacy issues. So, for example, if someone has a concussion in rugby, it's entered, not the privacy is protected, but the coach for the hockey team now can access that program and find out, oh, this person had that concussion in the rugby season as now they enter into the hockey season. Do you see that? I mean, to me, it's a valuable piece, but how do we protect privacy to make certain that we don't get someone's private information being pushed and stepped on when that happens?
I can't comment on the particular app you're referring to.
But I'm just talking, I use that as an example, but there are other apps that we've heard of as well that are out there.
I know there are software companies out there that have experience in this area. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention anyone in particular, but can I go ahead, or is it?
So, yeah,
I know there's one who
Information.
came and gave a presentation to the advisory committee called Privet. They operate now in many jurisdictions in the United States where it's the idea, it keeps things confidential. And it does go across, it can go across sports. The key with this to me is not necessarily the app or the program, but that it is consistent across the board. If you adopt something, then it has to be readable either across platforms or everyone has to buy into a particular mode. Otherwise, the system's going to break down. There are checks and balances that you can put into these things, which somebody has to give consent in order to share with another sport organization or whatever. And I think those can be built into a system like that. One of the things that, one of the recommendations actually that came up here is that the government look into something like this, how to enhance surveillance and data tracking and all of this stuff. So one of the studies that I'm assuming is going to be done as they go through these action items is looking into something like this, seeing what they feel might be the best solution to that, taking into account, of course, the privacy concerns that are there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Longfield?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you for compelling testimony. I'm just subbing on this committee, but I'm thinking of other studies that I've been involved with, and I've also been involved in mental health studies. The developing brain is one of the things that has been looked at in different ways. Brains under 25 years old are still in developing, and so for young people, they're more susceptible to different things relating to the brain, whether it's drugs, addictions, impacts, as we're talking about. Stem cell research is something Canada's leading in. And so I'm very interested in the role where the Canadian government can play a role in facilitating conversations or setting frameworks or setting financial like funding for CIHR or others. What's the, this has been asked in other ways today, but I'm thinking of, we've introduced cannabis legislation, and knowing that the developing brain is still not matching our legislation 100%, but we're trying to get to the 18 years old and younger, at least with our legislation. That would be an example, or we've just introduced suicide prevention hotlines across Canada in our most recent budget, where the federal government gets into those cross-jurisdictional areas where we put a framework together. It sounds like you've got a very solid framework within Ontario, and this has been asked in other ways, but is it the framework that we need to look at first of all? Is it the stem cell research opportunities? Is it funding? Is it regulations on sports equipment that has to be worn under a certain age? Like head protection gear, as in boxing or other areas where you get impacts.
That's a wide-ranging question.
I know, sorry. And we don't have a lot of time, I apologize.
I think the framework, the template here is important, because it speaks to so many areas that need to be addressed. So having this, if Rowan's Law could be implemented at the federal level and apply to every province and territory, that would be great. I
in
think
terms
that
of
would be
regulations.
in terms of regulation, in terms of policy, in terms of whatever needs to be put in place to address the issues that are there. Well, but when you get into the health issues, the education issues, I don't know if the federal reach can go down to the level that it does at provincial, other than influence. not this is the way it will be done. As far as equipment, I hesitate to talk about any kind of equipment because of the type of injury that concussion is. With respect to concussion, there's nothing out there now, despite the quackery that comes up regarding, mouth guards and all this. I had one the other day, somebody promoting an anti-concussion headband. If you look at the mechanics of this injury, these things are not going to prevent concussion. There's not a helmet that exists now that's going to prevent concussion. It's going to prevent your skull fractures maybe, but there's nothing there. That's no piece of equipment. There's a great cry after Rowan's death about why don't they wear helmets? Because it wouldn't have made any difference. There's no point in wearing a helmet. It's not going to stop a concussion. So getting into talking about specific pieces of equipment and everything, to me, that's a non-starter. It's a red herring. What needs to be done is educating people on recognize and remove, ensuring that when an athlete takes a hit that you don't even have to do the medical assessment. If you have a feeling that that person might have a concussion, they're off the field, they're off the ice, they're out of the game until a doctor says they're okay to come back.
Just got hit.
There might be a little, if you have an athletic trainer on the sideline or somebody, and that's another area where I think needs to be pursued is, having athletic trainers at events, at games, at whatever. These people are trained to make those recognition decisions and ensuring that athletes are taken care of properly. But the key to me is having people, all the people in the area, the coaches, trainers, parents, athletes, officials, able to say, that might be a concussion. That person has to go off and get taken care of. If it's not a concussion, wonderful. But if it is, second impact syndrome is what happened to Rowan. She had a third hit before her first two hits had time to heal. And she had the catastrophic event as a result of it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be two hits. It can be one hit beforehand and the next hit is the one that does them in. So, the keys really are education to me, and having the wherewithal and the buy-in from everyone involved that if any person takes a hit that looks like and there may have had a concussive event happen, they're out until they're cleared.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your statements and for your courage to pursue and educate. And you are doing that as well, because you're educating Canadians on this very aspect. And education is an important thing, especially in this area. So I thank you for that. I know I speak on behalf of my colleagues here today to thank you for coming to committee and your presentation and answering our questions. It's greatly appreciated. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. With that said, the meeting is adjourned.